Hi, folks. My video has been disabled by the host, it says. It calls for the tech issues. Nikki or Marty, are you able to address? Okay, great. Thank you. Hello and welcome. I'm Lucia, Rahilly, editorial director at McKinsey & Company, and your host for this series of live webinars sponsored by the Global Thought Leadership Institute at APQC. Quick note before we start, we are aiming with this series to give you the opportunity to engage with a range of experts and practitioners in the field of thought leadership today. We hold these webinars typically on a monthly cadence, and you can see our roster by following the GTLI on LinkedIn or by visiting APQC's website at apqc.org/GTLI. You can also take a look at past webinars. We've interviewed a lot of super interesting and helpful and thoughtful folks on our YouTube channel by searching YouTube for at GTLI-APQC. As always, we would love for this session to be as interactive as possible. We want to make this genuinely audience-backed, genuinely useful for those of you who have taken the time out of your schedules to attend. So we invite you to please send along your questions. Super easy. Just use the little Zoom chat functionality, ask whatever you want, and I will do my best to field them and to weave them in as we go. Today, Rhea Wessel. She is the founder and the head of the Institute for Thought Leadership, where she helps companies enable their leaders and their subject matter experts to use storytelling to grow their business. She advises and trains a range of folks on ideation, messaging, how to find and articulate ideas in ways that create new solutions. And she is also, very fortunately, a member of our board of advisors for the Global Thought Leadership Institute. Rhea, welcome. Thanks so much for being together with us today.
Thank you, Lucia. Happy to be here.
So let's get started. Let's start with some context. Tell us a little bit about your background and how you lit on thought leadership as a career.
I started as a journalist, like many people in thought leadership, and I still do some journalism work. And along the way, I started to write for a lot of management consultancies. So it would help with concept development, with writing points of view, articles, sometimes with the thought leadership, publications, speeches, et cetera, et cetera. And that was going very well, and I was doing quite a lot of that. And I realized that across the board, the subject matter experts were often very good talkers, but when I got their text to read it, to put it into shape, there was a mismatch between how much that person actually knows and how brilliant the ideas are and what the text looks like. So I was in there working with teams of experts and helping them get that articles in shape. And that's how I realized actually I'm working in the field of thought leadership. And it was at the time more of a buzzword, getting formalized and so forth. So that's been back 10, 15 years or so.
And I want to ask a couple of follows there. One is going to be on the transition from journalism to thought leadership. But before I do, I'm interested in what you said, because I think many of us have also had that experience where you hear someone speak and they're so persuasive. And then you read a draft of something that they have submitted to you, and it's perplexingly either superficial or ill thought through in some way. What do you think the difference is in sort of where does that gap lie between the ability to speak really well and the ability to um, unspool your idea in text?
Yeah, I like that unspooling. I think the problem comes from learning to write in an academic setting,
Mm.
and even at an undergraduate level, but certainly at graduate and PhD level, a certain writing style is just hammered into you. And I've even had an expert, I would go in and change the sentence from passive to active voice. And then on the read back, the expert would put it back in passive voice because that somehow sounded smarter, at least to his ear, you know.
Mhm.
So I think that a lot of the work that we do in companies, helping subject matter experts become more articulate, it's undoing academic training and helping people understand that just because you have a conversational tone or there's some maybe a news hook in your lead or something like that, that doesn't mean that it's not smart. And because dense and thick and complex is what many experts equate with smart writing. And I work with scientists a lot, and among the experts, they're really, really um, in the academic style, and it's a real mind shift when I come with the idea. Look, you could also talk about that idea, but in different ways, and we work with the framing. So I think it's the gap comes from training. So it's undoing all of that.
Yeah, let's stay on that for a minute, and then we can get back to sort of counsel for journalists who might want to make the shift. Um, you know, what part does, so we encounter in some instances, and in particularly in industries like you talked about, science, particularly in industries that tend to be more technical, we do encounter the same resistance to conversational writing. I think sometimes folks use the lingua franca of their industry and feel, as you were describing, that translation to writing for a wider audience can make them appear almost to be less of an expert. So when you start working with an author, do you encounter that resistance? And if so, how do you address it? So you gave the example of the passive voice being changed back to passive. How do you address that kind of resistance?
I think the showing is really a great way to do it, and it's wonderful now that everyone's working on Teams or some sort of video because I can show my screen and talk about it and like really scan the article and say, look, this is an academic setup of your article. So if I start at the top, I say, know it, know it, know it, heard it. Oh, that's interesting. And you
Yeah.
stumble on that really juicy nugget, but it's three-quarters of the way down. And then you play that back and say, why don't we kick out the rest, move this up top and build that out? And that brings the story forward. That brings the conversation forward. And so I call those framing discussions. And I've done this with teams, and it's a little nerve-wracking because you have to get buy-in from people who've really spent a lot of time, their evenings and weekends maybe, um, pouring their heart and soul into this article. And then I'm, getting the buy-in to basically massacre it. And but when you show it, then it's easier to explain. And then talking about these principles of thought leadership of journalistic writing, you've got to move the conversation forward. That's why we can't. It's the way into the story. So another example I give is, and this is in my book, Write Like a Thought Leader, is what I heard so many times was the framing: digital is here to stay, and your company needs a digital transformation. I'm like, oh,
Yep.
gee,
Yep.
I got
Right. Surprise. Yeah.
five
Yeah.
years ago, last Friday and this Monday, and now you can just put in AI, and now your company needs an AI strategy. And the
Mhm.
thing is, definitely we need that knowledge that the person wants to share, but you can't start the article that way. And so
Mhm.
you end up um, teaching a bit of journalistic principles. And I find most people, when you talk them through it, then they're on board. So
Mhm.
the
And you're based in Europe, you're in Frankfurt,
Mhm.
right? And in our experience, McKinsey is a global firm. The Europeans tend to be more um, academic and more traditional in the language they use to express themselves. Do you find regional cultural variations make a difference, or that like audience questions also play into willingness to translate into conversational tone?
Yeah, I think so. It may be just prejudice or whatever that it's definitely not based on data, but I was given an article by a client recently, and she said it's from our author in this country. So
Mhm.
expected me to understand what that meant, meaning this one's going to be particularly dense and set up very academically, et cetera, et
Yeah.
cetera. I don't want to name names.
Right.
I do cultural differences, and it's but we're spreading the news here with thought leadership, which is you can help the audience solve important problems and not bore them to death, right?
Mhm.
McKinsey has definitely shown this, with your library of content, all of the research, it's engaging and boring and dense is not a badge of honor. So
Mhm, mhm. Right. So then, this would seem to be a point of intersection with journalism, as you described. You have a journalism background. Many big companies like McKinsey used to kind of have to lure journalists over into the fold, but obviously media has become more and more disrupted, and we're now regularly receiving requests from journalists who are just seeking shelter now in this kind of PTSD-inducing world of today's media. So, but when you made the transition, did you find it challenging? And what would your counsel be to former media folks who are either looking at this as a potential career path or who have already made this switch and are now like, what is this
Mhm.
I've gotten myself into?
Yeah, so I made this switch very gradually and very incrementally.
Mm-hmm.
It was just really as my business was shifting and as I started to write for more management consultancies, I realized these are great experts and I would love to interview them for the next story for XYZ magazine that I'm doing as well. And I realized when I push and want the example or want to go down the level and get the detail that there was always an answer. So if you compare like the high level experts that I have interviewed when I did some freelancing for the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times, then these experts were on the same level. So I felt very comfortable in the world of writing for consultants, and I was learning so much about so many industries and functions and things like that. So it happened very gradually. And I'll tell you, Lucia, what happened is to me is I had an ongoing gig with a newspaper where I'd cover a conference every year. And then I realized, well, this could look wrong, right? Because it's journalism, but also I do write for some of these companies' magazines. And I talked to a science journalist, and he suggested, why don't you put a disclaimer on your website? So I have a writer's website and I have a disclaimer up there. And I said, dear editors, I work for traditional magazines, but I also work for companies. If you're worried about anything like that, let's definitely have a talk. And in any case where I think there might be some sort of um, problem or um, whatever, I talk to the editor, right? But now I'm doing less and less journalism and more thought leadership and training and education and so forth. So
Mm-hmm.
that's how I ended up there. So went to the other side very fluidly.
Yeah. And do you consider, so there used to be, and in certain cases, I hope there still is, but there used to be like a really a bright line between journalism and thought leadership. But again,
Mhm.
as journalism has gotten disrupted and the even, the appearance of LLMs that is like just sucking up information from the whole range of sources and then spitting it out in a synthesized way. There's some, I don't know if that bright line is, dissipating a little bit. Do you treat all of it as just storytelling? Where do you think the primary differences lie in today's journalism and today's thought leadership?
Mhm. The I think that journalists should be using AI for their research and also for their story framing. I think that's a really good way to use it. I was down in Perugia, Italy earlier this year, where Raju was there. I was at the
You, yeah.
journalism. That's what I'm going next year, so hopefully I'll see you there, or Raju as well. And a lot of newsrooms are implementing AI, and so I'm learning about that also for my next book because I think the use cases in journalism are very relevant to thought leadership. But I I think your question was about this blurring of the line and how it
Mhm.
differentiates. I think what I do is really focus on interviews for my journalistic stories from real live human warm-bodied experts and not, because I could also construct a very nice article with cold quotes and, using my understanding of story structure and everything, get the AI to do that, right? But that um, is risky. It's kind of I like to get the interview with the and then transform that into a story, and that is what journalism is and should be. But journalists are on a tight time budget very often, so many are not able to do as many interviews in the past. So it's tempting to just get a little synthesis from the AI and put it together. But I think that's where the line should be drawn and and it's a great tool. I teach AI and AI writing for thought leadership, and I'm definitely one over. I'll I'll tell you how it happened to me for that one. I was watching a um, webinar from B2B marketing profs, and it was a 10-part webinar. This must have been 2 summers ago. And I was like, oh my gosh, after that, it was really a revealing moment. I was like, okay, either I'm getting on board this train
Right.
or the train's leaving without me. And it was super eye-opening. And what I've also seen that's very interesting, Lucia, is because I run a small company and I'm very independent and I'm a writer, I can get in there and experiment with the AI in ways that people who are at large companies are not allowed to do, right?
Mhm.
Because very much it's about regulations, which tools, et cetera, et cetera. So
Yeah.
I've trained entire comms departments at large companies, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm definitely ahead of the curve. And I think that's one reason why is because I don't have someone telling me what I
Yeah.
can't do in the application. I'm out there seeing the what's possible. And it's astounding.
It's mind-boggling. Okay, I want to get into depth into the AI question, but before we do, let's just talk a little bit more about the way that you view kind of the mechanics, right, of storytelling, and talk about how you coach leaders to home in on the best ideas, express them in the most interesting, compelling way, as you were describing, because I
Mhm.
would imagine this piece before we get to sort of the using AI to enable it, this piece alone could be incredibly helpful to folks who are in the position of educating their experts, their SMEs, on how to get started in thought leadership in some of these smaller organizations where there's not a tradition of thought leadership. There's a lot of education that has to happen and so forth. So where do you've got a very codified approach. You've mentioned your framing system a few times. I know you have a 3-step, but let's start, like, where do you begin when you're working with a new client who's an aspiring author?
Mm-hmm. The I start with a journalistic interview to understand what this author has to say, who they are, why they might be seen as an expert on this, or why they see themselves or their firm, and what the business intent is, or what the business alignment is. So it's an interviewing process of figuring out what's new and what will bring the story forward. And so I used to do the financial services blog for a large accounting firm, and boy, have I gotten in the weeds with some accounting concepts, you know. But usually by the end of the hour, I'm able to say, okay, this are the stories I see, you know, and I've got 70% of my notebook, or, you know, some cases I've got 25 we need the second interview. So the framing call can take a full hour sometimes, depending on how complex the idea is and lining it all up. So it's a journalistic skill set put to use. And in my book, I did try to reverse engineer that process that we use. And I say we because I know you're doing the same as the editorial director at McKinsey. It's how do you make that accessible to non-journalists? And to do that, I had, it wasn't intuitive. I had to really figure out what I was doing. And even now, um, working with clients and everything is recorded, which is really nice. And maybe have 2, 3 calls with a subject matter expert saying, okay, we want to do this report for this industry. This is the where we're focused, et cetera. And by the end of 2, 3 calls, I do know what the story is, and I've played it back to them. Here's the framing that I see. What do you think of that? But now I can take the transcripts from those calls, and then I can ask the AI, how did I actually derive the story?
Mhm,
And
mhm.
what was actually happening? So everything in my book was written before AI existed. So I had to do the reverse engineering and the deconstruction myself. Now it's a little bit easier in that sense. I was actually just doing that recently. The answers I got were not that great. The AI made me do things I felt I didn't do. But now I've really gone on a tangent. So what was
No, very quickly, you've alluded a couple of times to your book. Tell our audience what your book is, what's the name of your book, and maybe Nikki could put it into the chat for folks if they're interested in getting.
yeah. The book is called Write Like a Thought Leader, and it's about helping you find and frame and flesh out your best ideas. So that's the 3 steps to thought leadership writing.
Mhm.
And again, it was me looking at my own processes and figuring that out at the beginning when I started the writing of the book. It was 7 steps, and then I couldn't remember them all. You know, I was like, well, that's not going to be a good model then if I can't rattle them off. And so I changed it around, and those 3 steps, finding your thought leadership niche, framing your stories, and fleshing it out, those 3 mirror the bases, the basics, workshops, and thought leadership writing incubator that we give to firms. So the focus that we have is really the masses of subject matter experts in a firm, how to harvest those ideas in service of the formal thought leadership program. And
Mhm.
you mentioned smaller firms. Some smaller firms are not able to get articles at all from their subject matter experts. I know of one last year that was trying to pay them to write articles. Yes, and
Oh,
they would occasionally get the articles, but that still didn't make them good just because the expert got paid to do it. I mean, it was a nominal sum, but so I feel like the work that we do in the Thought Leadership Writing Incubator, it's really good for either speeding up the number of ideas and stories that the formal thought leadership program receives, or in some cases, you need to slow it down. Maybe you have really done that well, and your company is getting too many articles that are not necessarily refined. I spoke to
Mm-hmm.
someone in Houston in January or February last year, had that situation. Too much content to deal with before it
Mm-hmm.
reaches the formal thought leadership function. So,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, our supply demand ratio is mismatched on the, demand side. We have much more demands than we can accommodate, which is a good position to be in. I mean, it's very interesting that a company would pay its own SMEs to do this because it's the inverse of what a lot of companies experience, in which um the ROI has to be sold at the leadership level by the folks who are interested in starting a thought leadership program, right? Or by the, comms group or the marketing group if there's not an existing publishing group. So it's interesting. Okay, let's talk through these 3 steps that you mentioned: finding, framing, fleshing out. Talk us through that 3-step process that you have.
okay. So finding your thought leadership niche as an individual or as a firm means looking at what do you know and what do you know deeply, how that aligns with your purpose, and what is your unique perspective on that. And where those three come together, that is what I call your story sweet spot. So that's the place you want to be writing from, because it's natural. You want to get the knowledge out there because something about it is activating your purpose. And the finding your niche is tricky. Some people in our Harvard alumni program, Harvard alumni entrepreneurs, they come and maybe they're running 2 businesses, or it's hard to say, oh yeah, I want to do this, and so sometimes it's difficult to actually nail that down. So we work with them, coaching, talking it out, peer reflection. What is the niche, and again, aligning that to the business intent, right? So getting the best niche or the right niche for you is a good thing, but you want to build a business out of this. This is a practice, right? You want to sell your ideas. You want to think once and sell often, as
Right.
Matt Church from Thought Leaders Business School has said. I really like that. So that's the finding your niche stage. And once you know that, then you've got to get into the actual expertise that you have. And that's the story framing stage. And that's where, like what I mentioned, the digital is here to stay, thing. You got to find the new way into the story. So I help people with creating different mind maps and really visualizing what they know as like a big deep dive on the problem.
Mm-hmm.
And then the solutions that you offer your audience, those can be like the headline, right? So I teach the story framing system in a way that I prefer to take longer, but within 45 minutes or an hour, we can do the exercise, and a subject matter expert can generate 10 to 12 headlines for articles that they could write immediately, because they're not going to require research and data collection and so forth. These will be first person conversational articles. And then they begin to start to think in story, and that's exciting. And in the 10-week incubator that we do for Harvard alumni entrepreneurs, I was like, okay, at the beginning, by the end of this program, I want you to be stopping the car to write down the next story idea, because they're popping in your mind that fast. So you become an ideator in motion, and or stopping your walk or on the train, grabbing a notebook, not just car, but the so it's is helping people get that narrow slice that's relevant to their audience, that solves the problem, and it happens to be a problem you know a lot about, and your firm can help you, can help them solve it. So that's the framing. And then the third step is the fleshing it out. And in our longer form workshops and in the incubator, I actually get the subject matter experts to write a full length article. So if you give me one day, 20 experts in a room, they've found their niche, they've framed their stories, they got 10 or 11, and they've written one by 5 p.m. And it's really, for many of them, it's like, wow, for the scientists I work with, we go 2 days for that. Um,
Mhm, mhm.
but it's really an aha experience for many of them because they're given the right or the ability to do something that maybe was not allowed before, which was just tell it like it is in your voice, first person, your client examples um, carry the story. So that's 3 steps.
That's super helpful. Question on your point about the solutions um, c- constituting the headline. Often in our case, the solutions are what we call the prescriptives are the least fleshed out when pieces come to us. In other words, there could be a lot of data on context,
Mhm.
exogenous dynamics that are changing, the risks and opportunities that may create, but then how actually what to do
Mhm.
to take advantage of those opportunities and sidestep the risks. Sometimes when it comes to us, feels a little bolted on, right? Like it's the
Mhm.
same.
Right, yeah.
Um, uh can be a little off the shelf unless it's like that you've got to work. But so how does that do you experience that? Like it would be hard, I think, for us, at least at the start, to have the prescriptions or the solutions as you're describing them be the headline. It's a
Mhm.
very interesting way of
Mhm.
thinking about that.
Yeah, it when I was creating all of that, it really happened in a very serendipitous way because I had a slide deck where I had shown some headlines from articles that I had written and from years past, and then I looked at it and saw that there's a template to different headlines. There's a how to a benefit, a unique benefit, or a numbers, or there's the clever language. I wrote this one article, business schools set sail for in chartered waters. It was about a on ship business school program that was for the Wall Street Journal. But the point is that each of these headlines, there's a template behind it. So once you can see the template, that you need that in order to make that the solution. So to get to your question, the idea is that we're flipping the script basically, and that the headline enables the writer to deliver on the story with a stronger focus on the solution.
Mhm,
And
mhm,
so that's why, so in journalism, we were never writing our headlines back in the newspaper days. We wrote the copy and sent it in without a headline. The editor wrote the headline to make it fit. In thought leadership writing, I think it's very useful to get the expert to create the headline, and it's a form of solution in one way. But what I like to call it is from the editor Sean Coyne, who wrote Story Grid. The headline becomes an enabling constraint. So
mhm,
it constrains the knowledge because there's way too much knowledge, but it enables you. And so I was teaching this to chartered financial analysts at CFA Society several years back, and I had a woman in the group. She's like, look, this is a very cheesy headline, 3 ways to please your institutional investors or whatever.
mhm.
And I'm like, all right, I understand, but let's do this. Why don't you write the article first And that gives you the clarity, what you're delivering. You're delivering the 3 ways or the best practices or whatever it is. And then at the end, put on a more elegant headline. And so it's really for the writer's thinking purposes. And if you look at the way I teach it now, some of those I'm suggesting you come up with pretty cheesy headlines, but the purpose is for you to have something that you can actually write, and it usually works. So
Interesting. And we have a question in the chat. Can you provide an example of a solution-based headline? You sort of did where you said 3 ways to please your clients or whatever that was, but do you have one that's a particular favorite or a recent example you found exemplified this enabling constraint mode?
sure. The well, I think the numbers are a good way sharing the best practices. The
Mhm.
or maybe a bold statement,
Mhm.
and then you're delivering on that statement or unpacking that statement.
Yep.
Um, or the problem, solution, benefit
Mhm.
type of headline. And the yeah, if you check out my Forbes column, I think a lot
Mhm.
of those headlines probably, hopefully,
There's a
um,
series of good examples. Yeah.
to your
Okay.
thought leadership challenges. So that's small and mid-sized firms.
Okay, good. Now, I'm mindful of time and I want to talk more about AI, but very quickly, you mentioned the thought leadership writing incubator that you're involved with via Harvard alumni entrepreneurs. Do you want to just say a little bit about what that program aspires to do and how?
Sure. It's a 10-week thought leadership writing incubator for experts from across disciplines. And I have a team of story coaches who teach along with me, all journalists, basically friends from the years past, and my former editor at BBC and Wall Street Journal, who edited my book too. And we deliver this. It begins with the story boot camp, and then it continues with theory and group co-writing. And at the end of the program, each expert or each participant has written a total of 3 articles.
Hmm.
And then we have awards when we bring in someone outside the cohort who hasn't met everyone to choose the best article. And the reason that I created this by bundling a bunch of the formats that I have is because I was teaching the story boot camp as a 1 day program in consulting companies and other knowledge-based companies. And I would go and teach it and be very exciting, and everyone would have this aha experience. But then 1 month later, they wouldn't necessarily be able to repeat that. And some of the people I noticed on LinkedIn, they've gotten some traction with the thought leadership since then. But I think you need a safe space to come and check in and talk and like, where are you stuck? And I don't know if I can really publish this. And is this a new idea,
Mhm.
new enough? And so we create that safe space. And the goal is to bring this to large companies to feed into the thought leadership program, because and it's a you know wonderful place to collect the tacit knowledge and the ideas that your firm has. And in that story boot camp that I'm remembering that caused me to create the thought leadership incubator, there were a couple of ideas that really needed to be escalated. Like, this is good. This is a nice methodology. This is, this could become a new service line, but there was no way to do that. So,
Mhm.
and I use things like free writing in there. So we very often start with free writing.
Mhm.
Is I give a writing prompt and just start writing, and many people are really excited about what they're discovering, their own ideas, stumbling across their own ideas. So I try
Mhm.
to use different techniques to to get the ideas and then get them in shape. So, and
Yeah.
that program also includes one-on-one story coaching. So each
Hmm.
expert gets a session with a journalist.
Yeah, it's again, just the existence of such a program and the fact that entrepreneurs would be coming and spending 10, spending time over a 10-week period developing it is indicative. I don't know if 20 years ago there would have been such a program, right? There's a lot of demand for thought leadership in the marketplace now. Speaking of which, given that it's a Harvard alumni entrepreneurs, and I'm just segueing over to AI here.
Mhm.
I wonder how AI will begin to enable, especially some, like there's a lot of tech entrepreneurialism, obviously.
Yes.
And as you mentioned, small companies tend to have, they have to be scrappy and resourceful and
Mhm.
productive and all these things. And therefore, it almost it's a massive benefit to have the freedom to experiment with all these tools and so forth. Do you see more of your clients and aspiring thought leaders turning to Chat and Claude and Writer AI to help them draft and structure content?
Yeah, I think it's happening, and we make it clear in this program that I will be talking about AI toward the end, but the goal is for you to gain these skills organically first, and
Mhm.
then use the AI to boost that. And I have given an advanced course, happens once a year, where we do a deeper dive on the AI. And how that can work with some of the concepts that I teach. But yes, people are gravitating to it, and I think that for there's when it's a writer and it's about good writing and all of that stuff, I think that you can generate decent texts and so forth, but you still need to be a skilled user. And if you don't know what makes a story good and don't have a language
Yeah.
for that and haven't understood that, then you'll get something and you'll think it's good, but it might not be so good. And
Mhm.
and that's why you can't leapfrog completely. But the tools are amazing. There's a lot you can do. And so far, we have not converted the thought leadership writing incubator to an AI writing incubator. Um, it may happen in the,
Right. Yeah.
I don't
I
know.
mean,
Um,
it's the tools are advancing so just incredibly quickly. It's remarkable.
yeah, I
Um, the content market was obviously extremely crowded prior to AI exploding
have.
to the scene, right? And we've all seen all the, much has been written about fragmented attention, the attention economy, and so forth. We're all kind of waiting for AI to cause this Cambrian explosion of content. How do you think strong content will continue to stand out in this context? Do you have any thoughts there?
Yeah, I think that we need the strong content even more and the trusted sources to fill a vacuum that journalism is not able to do. And solutions oriented writing in the form of thought leadership. So the earlier you were talking, and I remember that I did a deep dive into what's called solutions journalism, and there's a thing called the Solutions Journalism Network,
Mhm.
and that is all about um, getting journalists to shift to focus less on the problem and more on the solution, and then so that people can apply it. And it's very focused on civic engagement and solutions at the municipal level and so forth. But I see parallels to thought leadership because it's solutions writing. It's not, when I was writing my book, I was thinking, is this service journalism? No, that's different. This is solutions journalism, and there's this whole world of solutions journalism, or it's solutions journalism with a marketing intent on the back end.
Mhm.
So I think that we need the heavy hitting, deep dive, research based content, and and because of the trust issue and because of the explosion of content, I
Mhm.
think that a company like McKinsey is ideally set up to absolutely stand out in that area. And I think it's still a question mark on how SEO is actually pulling it. I've heard some of your interviews saying that your search results are down, but referrals from AI are up, et cetera, et cetera. I think that is still a mystery, especially to small and medium-sized companies that don't
Mhm.
have the resources to have all the data that the large ones do, and all the understanding of how the digital space works. But I think that that's an open topic, but I think we need more and more experts out there. And I talked about finding your thought leadership niche, and I did these exercises myself. And I have to say that one thing that really is important to me is not seeing good ideas get lost. And
Mhm.
so that the work that I do, it really activates my purpose, and I have some stories of meeting experts and they tell me something really cool and exciting. I'm like, whoa, why didn't I know about that?
Mhm. Mhm.
Came to this conclusion that we, as a human race, we have so many of the solutions that we already need. And that very often they're stuck in some expert's head, you know and that's what thought leadership does, is get those out and prepare them and get them out to the right audience. And that's a great field to be in, and I feel very lucky to work in this space. So
Mhm.
let me know if I didn't answer your question. So
No, you did, and you raised so many more interesting points at each stage of this. We are unfortunately at or slightly over time, but I would urge people to join us in Houston, February 5th to 6th at the GTLI 2026 Symposium. And we'll talk about a lot of this stuff, including how to maximize for appearance in the LLMs, GEO, AEO, the kinds of ways that many of us are experimenting with structuring content now in order to have that content appear more visibly in the LLMs. And a lot of the sort of, how to harness the promise and sidestep the peril of AI in this field. So please do join us. Ray, what a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us today.
thank you, Lucia. Great
And,
speaking with you.
and again, for more about not just the symposium, but for all the upcoming events hosted by the GTLI, including future webinars, please visit our website, apqc.org/GTLI. We've got a great one. It was just up, coming in October, with Scott Leff of Leff Communications. He is one of the industry's most experienced thought leadership agencies he leads and founded. You can also subscribe to our weekly GTLI newsletter for highlights of the best thought leadership content of the moment. Curation, always a plus, given that we are, as discussed, awash in content. And of course, follow the GTLI on LinkedIn. Have a great day or evening. Thanks again for joining us, and be well.